This is a SACNAS Science Video Podcast, exploring the lives and research of SACNAS scientists. I'm Cassandra Brooks. Scientists use many tools to understand the world around us, from watching with the naked eye to peering through microscopes, or using highly sophisticated technologies to peek below the ocean's surface. Garza, an assistant professor in science and environmental policy at California State University, Monterey Bay, does the latter. He uses incredible new technologies to reveal underwater habitats, which then helps marine resource managers understand how to better protect local fish and other ocean animals.
I use mapping tools, so I use sort of traditional, they're not traditional, they're really high-tech mapping tools to look at the distribution of animals, and like the intertidal, so tide pool type animals, so sea stars and barnacles and mussels, and I make maps of them and I look at how the distribution of those animals relates to their surrounding environment. So if it's the rock underneath it, or the waves that go over them, or how the temperature varies, and I look at that and I can make maps of that, and then I can analyze with statistics how real those relationships are, and you can use that to just understand why you find certain groups of animals in one location, not another, but you can use it for managers to tell them, hey, the reason you have that suite of animals here is because there's a certain type of habitat, and unless you preserve that habitat, those animals that people like to fish aren't going to be there. And so it makes a cool tool because you can, again, assign a number to it, but because it's a map, it's visual, and so I can show that to not just the scientist, but to the policy person as well, and so, or just to a member of the general public, and it's perfectly clear to them what's going on in that particular point in space.
Yeah. But when you say map, obviously, to most people, when they think of map, they think of a road map with highways and things.
Yeah, this is more of like the way I describe it, with my undergraduates, I ask them, how many of you play Xbox? They all raise their hand, and the same technology and the same computer program that used to make the landscapes in the video games, that's the types of maps we make. We sort of capture that data and we turn it into these three-dimensional maps that you can visualize how the animals sort of fall across the landscape. And so it's not a map in a traditional auto club map, but it's a map that has dimensions to it that you can spin around on a computer and actually really look and go, hey, yeah, that makes sense. Now I understand why those animals are in that point in space.
So say, where you work in Monterey Bay, California, we might see what's a good black rockfish habitat or...
Yeah, so you could look at, black rockfish, and they'll be associated with kelp forests and all the boulders that the kelp are on, and so you need that habitat in order to have that fish there, and without it, that fish is going to disappear because that fish needs the kelp in order to rear its young and to hide from predators, and without it, it just won't be there. But it's hard to tell members of the public that, because if they don't scuba dive, they don't see it, and they kind of have to try and visualize it in their head. But if you can make a map of that's dimensions and looks real, and then show it to them, then they get really interested in it. They're like, oh, this is really cool, and then they have this vested interest in protecting the resource at that point.
So you provide this lens into the underwater world in a lot of ways. How do you actually map the environment?
There's lots of ways to do it. I use digital imagery. And then what I do is I use GPS units, and we can actually create what's called a base map. So I can put points on my image when I take the image that I can put the GPS unit on, and I can take those points and put them into a geographic information system database. And then I can do what's called reference my images back to those points, and so I can create a photographic map. And so that's one way we do it. Another way is we use something called LiDAR, which is a type of laser mapping system that you can set up on shore, and sends out millions of beams of laser points out, and what it does is it maps the surface of the rock you're looking at. And at the same time, it's taking photographs of what it's mapping, so it can automatically render those images to the underlying map of the topography that you're making. So that's another way we do it.
Corey says he's always been one to push the limit, searching for ways to make science more applied, even if it means doing things in ways that have never been done before.
I really like science, but I like bringing new approaches to things. Even when I was in grad school, I was like, well, why can't we look at it that way? Why can't we test things this way? Oh, that's not the way it's been done. And I was always that guy in the back of the room with, that smart aleck remark, well, why can't we do it that way? And, even what we're doing nowadays, a lot of the techniques I use, I remember one of my former advisors, when I was a postdoc, saying, no, this work will never, ever have an applied aspect to it. I think, no, why not? It can. And so I like taking those approaches, like these classic ecology approaches and these technologies that we haven't used in ecology before, seeing how we can integrate the two and then actually solve problems with it. And that's what really gets me excited.
So what is it, what was it about science, and even today, what is it about science that
well, there was a sort of romanticism of it, right? So I remember reading Steinbeck, and I wanted to be Ed Ricketts, and I wanted to be Doc and sit down there and do all of that. And there's that aspect to it, the traveling and the mystery, and so that's fun. And then it's just the discovery portion is the other thing that keeps me going about science. It's it's one of the few fields where that's your sole job. Is my job is to really big part of my job is to go in and figure out how the world works. And it's like I have like the world's largest puzzle out there in Monterey Bay, trying to figure out how does this marine system really work. And so that's the other thing that keeps me going. It's that sort of thrill of new knowledge and exploring.
With the SACNAS Science Video Podcast, I'm Cassandra Brooks.